Welcome to episode 9 of Let's Talk Worship podcast. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. We meet every Wednesday at 11 a.m. And these are pre-recorded, so if you're interested in subscribing, you will get a notification prior to the airing of the episode. And to register, you go to insidenow.co. Thank you so much to Inside Now for hosting me and allowing me to use their platform. And I am inviting you to partner with us by liking, sharing, and subscribing. But also, if you want to support us financially, that would be great. We are planning to continue equipping and discipling individuals to understand what it is to host the presence of God, develop centers that will host corporately the presence of God. But also, it requires funds in order to spend time with people and disciple. So if you're willing to partner with us, you can always contact me at larosina.malvina@gmail.com. My website is no longer active, so you can reach me in my email or any of the social media platforms, whether it's Instagram or Facebook. You can always send me a message. So thank you in advance. And also, if you want to be a sponsor in our show, you can always contact me the same way. So without further ado, we are going today to talk about a chapter of the scriptures that the Lord gave me many years ago when I first engaged in the journey of understanding the tabernacle of David and how to host the manifest presence of God. The Lord brought me to this chapter, and at the beginning I didn't see the connection, but then slowly with time and a lot of studying, it's become a core portion of my training. And the reason for that is the Lord revealed to me many years ago that there will always be a tension between ministering to the people and ministering to Him. That is usually what creates the most conflict. People want to be available for people. How you get most of your money or the platform is if you have something to provide for the people. People want to prophesy. People want to teach. People want to do healing ministries, crusades, and all that kind of stuff. So there's always a tension on the majority of what the people want. And ministering unto the Lord is a little bit different because it's for the Lord. So sometimes it looks like they're not getting what they desire. So in that, the Lord revealed to me that the way He showed it to me was two trains that go in parallel tracks. It's not one or the other. They're both part of the kingdom, but it is important that we spend time understanding how to honor and carry that resting place where the manifest presence of God can rest. And it gets a little sticky. In that, you can look in the scriptures. There's always been a group of, let's say, high priests in all the Old Testament that are the ones that hosted the presence of God and ministered unto the Lord. And you have high priests like Zadok that were very faithful, and we will study Zadok in detail because I think he is an integral part of this message of presence, who was loyal to David always. And there was Abiathar, the other high priest. Those two high priests served under David. But by the time Solomon came along, Abiathar betrayed the kingdom and went with David's other son, Adonijah. You can find this in 1 Kings chapter 1, and you see the conflict there. And it's so clear how the majority of the people followed Adonijah and Abiathar to a high place that wasn't even what God had assigned. It's a different rock, and that's not the purpose of my podcast today. But it's a majority of individuals, the people of Israel, follow that movement, while very few stay with David and put Solomon, which is what really God had prophesied that was going to happen. So you have Zadoks that stay loyal to David and Abiathars that compromise and go the other way. You also have the sons of Eli that compromise. And then you have Aaron and building the golden calf. So you have in this high priest community in the Old Testament always that tension of people that want to minister unto the Lord, minister to the people. Same thing happens with Paul, and there are moments where he tells Timothy, no, don't hang out with those people because their heart is in a different place. So I think it's important that we understand, especially with the theme that I have shared in previous episode of this is the year 2024, choosing a side, choosing holiness versus common. In common in Hebrew is the word profanity. There is a common movement that can become profane, that can become so common, is not honoring to God. So that is something that I believe is going to get more and more extreme as this year it continues to progress. So with that, I wanted to, the Lord had given me many years ago, the book of Numbers, chapter 25. And I'm going to spend this episode focusing on this. And I would like to connect it to Melchizedek at the end. I believe that Melchizedek is important to understand when you're speaking of presence. He is a high priest. We are of the a priest and a king and a priest of the order of Melchizedek in Psalm 110. So I will do an episode on Melchizedek, and that's a subject that's fascinating to me. And I believe that the Tabernacle of David is a precursor. And I know that may not sound very biblical, but to me, that David was prophesying a king who puts an effort on, and a king with a priesthood in a tabernacle together, which was unheard of because the king was not to enter into that presence, but he did it. He broke that system to establish the tabernacle of David, which hosted the presence of God and only the presence of God. It wasn't for the people to minister to the people or for sacrificial orders of the people. It was mainly for the Lord. And because of that, I believe that David was symbolizing or prophesying, whichever word you want to use, the importance of a king and a priest. We are a priest, we're a holy, a royal priesthood is what I'm trying to say, a royal priesthood, and we are a kingdom of priests. And that's all over the scriptures. And I think in the episode on priesthood, I covered some of these scriptures already. So my objective today is not to revisit that, but we will do Melchizedek, and we will look at that king and priest of the order of Melchizedek and how that fits in presence. So today, as I revisit this chapter 25 of the book of Numbers, I would like to examine some of the Hebrew roots of the words in that chapter that will reveal some of the problems that we have in modern time. I know it's Old Testament, but it reveals so much. And it's something that we have to guard our heart against. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the chapter. And as one thing that I would like to say before I read it is, remember this in Numbers chapters 22 to 24, the beginning is King Balak and a diviner or false prophet Balaam, who is being told you have to prophesy against Israel. So this is like the scene before we go into Numbers 25. And what ends up happening is the Lord grabs Balaam, the diviner, and says, no. You are going to speak what I say. And in that, imagine, this is not even a good prophet. He has to say what God is saying. And in that, he blesses Israel over and over and over again against the will of King Balak, who is the king of Moab. Now, the Lord has given the Israelites all these blessings and victory against the Moabites. And now, in spite of all that, this is the thank they give the Lord in chapter 25. So this is really important to see the backdrop of what's happening prior to that. You would think, but God has blessed us so much. Shouldn't we now offer him everything we have? And this is the response the Israelites give the Lord. This is the activities, the actions that they take. And then we're going to study that a little in depth to see what we can learn out of this chapter. This is important as we consider ministering unto the Lord. So first of all, we are going to read Numbers 25, and I'm going to be reading out of the Amplified Bible, as I said in previous episodes. I like it because it gives me more information than others. It says, Israel settled and remained in Shittim, and the people began to play the prostitute with the women of Moab by being unfaithful to God. So remember, they have had all these blessings prophesied to them. God has given them everything, and they respond by sleeping with the women of Moab. For they invited the Israelites to sacrifice of their gods, and the Israelites ate food offered to idols and bowed down to Moab's god. So because of sexual engagement, which, in the spiritual sense, we could be in prostitution spiritually, because we're being unfaithful to the Lord. So I want to use this chapter to do a parallel. How do we become unfaithful to the Lord? And remember, if we're going to focus on the presence of God, what are those things that in ministry today compete with that presence? Not to eliminate, I'm not saying to eliminate it, but there are so many things that when you're ministering to the Lord, why are we going in the other direction when God is there? It would be like I'm talking to my husband and another man goes by and I take my attention from my husband to go to look at the other guy. Well, that is idolatry. That is adultery. So in verse number 3 it says, so Israel joined themselves. So they've gone all the way with the Baals. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor in worship. So remember, this is a worship issue. And remember, worship is a sacrifice. It's laying down your life, including your ministry, to minister unto the Lord. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. So now the Lord is very angry because they're worshiping other things. The Lord said to Moses in verse 4, take all the leaders of the people who have committed sin with the Moabites and execute them in broad daylight before the Lord, so that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. So Moses says to the judges of Israel, each one of you must kill his men who have joined themselves to Baal of Peor in worship. So remember, here's the Lord very, very jealous, very, very angry, because they are unfaithful to him. Now, thank God for Jesus and for grace these days, because we have a lot of competition when it comes to presence. So verse number 6 says, then one of the Israelites came and presented to his relatives a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and the whole congregation of the Israelites, while they were weeping over God's judgment at the doorway of the tent of meeting, the tabernacle. So remember, they're weeping over God saying, I'm going to kill them all. In verse 7 says, when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, this man is important. This is a man with a zeal for God. And Phinehas is important to remember. This is a character that can teach us so much because he puts everything in the line for honoring God. So he says, when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, so he's from the line of a high priest, he's a man of presence. He says, saw this, he left the congregation and took a spear in his hand. And he went after the men of Israel into the tent and pierced them both through their body, the men of Israel and the woman. And then the plague of the Israelites stopped. Nevertheless, those Israelites who died in the plague numbered 24,000. So here is a man going in front of the tent of meeting. I mean, how much obvious can it be? If we put it in modern time, here we are in the service of the Lord, honoring the presence of God, and we are going to be distracted by other things. Sometimes things that God never said. And that made Phineas, who is from the high priest, so to me, remember, I'm trying to draw a parallel on how focused we need to be if we're going to minister unto the Lord. The Lord is jealous. He's a jealous God. He hasn't changed. So he wants our full attention on him. After we get what we need in that presence and we offer to him our lives as a living sacrifice, we can go and minister to other people. But don't compete. It's all of him or the people. You have to choose. So here he goes and he pierced the couple because this man of Israel had gone with this Moabite woman. Now, I will continue reading and I'm going to do a little bit of a study to put things in perspective. In verse 10 says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned my wrath away from the Israelites because he was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not destroy the Israelite in my jealousy. So here's a man with a zeal and jealousy for his God. So we need more of that. We need people that are so crazy about their God, they'll do anything. Therefore, say in verse 12, Behold, I give to Phinehas my covenant of peace. And this is important. I will expand a little bit on this covenant of peace. And it shall be for him and his descendant after him a covenant of an everlasting priesthood. Oh, I love that. I want that for my whole family because he was jealous, impassioned for the unique honor and respect all to his God. We need to honor and respect the presence of God. And he made atonement for the sons of Israel. So you see, when you have that zeal and you stand for righteousness, you stand for what's right, which is don't distract from the presence of God, the Lord will honor that. And he makes a covenant of peace. It's important that it's a covenant of peace. And we're going to see the connection with Melchizedek. Now, the name of the man in verse 14 of Israel who was killed with the Midianite woman was Zimri, the son of Salu. And this is important. Zimri was the name of the man, a leader of the father's household among the Simeonites. The name of the Midianite woman who was killed was Cosbi, a daughter of Sur, who was the tribal head of a father's household in Midian. Now remember, when the Bible gives you a name, it means something. So we're going to study those names and see the conclusion that we make that applies to modern times and our worship. In verse 16, and I'll finish with this, then the Lord spoke to Moses saying, provoke hostility with the Midianites and attack them. For their hearsay, they harass you with their tricks, the tricks with which they deceive you in the matter of Baal Peor, in the matter of Cosbi, the daughter of the leader of Midian, their sister, who was killed on the day of the plague because of the Baals of Peor. Now, remember, there was a plague. There was many people who died. This was the judgment of God. But because of the zeal of one man, Phinehas, who was a high priest, who honored, he respected his God, the Lord spared the rest. Now, he had to go and pierce these two people. So, by the way, the word jealousy, I would like to add this. It's the jealousy of God for his people. Don't do that. Focus on me. It's called an intolerant of unfaithfulness. God does not tolerate the transfer of the honor and worship that is due to him to any other being or object. That's the definition of jealousy. I'm going to read it again. God does not tolerate the transfer of the honor and worship that is due him to any other being or object. So in verse 11 of chapter 25, it speaks of that jealousy of God where he doesn't want the attention to him to compete with any other thing. So can we make that possible in our services today? We either honor God or we honor the people. We have to decide. So while we are doing one thing, we can be doing the other. The other thing that I wanted to define is Baals. What we know what the Baals are. Baal of Peor was a god. You know, the Jezebel, that was her god. It was associated with prostitution. It produces things. It's a fertility god, and it will provoke a corruption. Now remember, a lot of sexual sin that we see in the church today is just a result of a distortion of our worship, because you either honor God or you honor other things. But when your worship is divided, you're being unfaithful. So when you're unfaithful to the Lord, there is always corruption. So that brings idolatry. And in a lot of places, it's true sexual immorality. So, a lot of manifestation of sexual immorality comes from that, from idolatry. A lot of people, for money, for power, for different things, get engaged in activities that are not holy. Remember, this is the year to choose holiness, not common. So when you have like Abiathar, the priest I mentioned at the beginning, well, he had all the people, the majority of the people. Zadok was not necessarily very popular. He's over there just with David. But this was holy. This is what was the will of God versus the common thing that everybody wanted. So a lot of the time, moving with God is not necessarily popular, and especially when it takes attention away from people. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the name of the man. Remember, they're in the tent of meeting. This man, who's an Israelite, is going with Moabites. That was a big no-no. That was not accepted. Again, if we're going to apply that to modern times, there are certain things that should not be allowed when we are going into the tent of meeting, when we're ministering to the Lord. When the focus is a meeting for God. We are going to worship God, and God is jealous. Don't hang out with Moabites. Don't hang out with other things. Don't yoke yourself with unbelievers either. So it doesn't mean you don't go minister out there to the lost. But when we are in this, we're either ministering outside or we are ministering corporately as a body. So we need to understand holiness. And the previous episode was on that holiness. So one thing I wanted to cover was the name of the people, because it is important for applications today. The name of the man that went with the Moabite woman, that created Phinehas' zeal and outburst because of jealousy for his God, was the name Zimri. Zimri is strong number in the Hebrew, 2174, for those that would like to search it. And he was a leader. He was a man who was leading people. He was openly engaged in this sinful behavior with a Moabite. And his name is a name that means to, here we go. It's a root derived from the word musical or melodious. So Zimri is a name that has to do with music. How much worship and music do we put in our meetings? That's what his name. So this Israelite, his name is praises, music, melody. The name of the woman that he goes with is Cosby. It's the Hebrew Strong 3579, and her name means to lie, to say false things, to be deceitful. So her name is, how deceitful and influential can someone be when we are singing to the Lord? So Cosby and Zimri get together, and that is what generates the jealousy and the reaction of Phinehas, who is a son of a high priest, who is supposed to be focusing on presence, on the Lord. So what you see here is, based on the names, I think the Lord allowed this chapter to say, I was going to judge her because they're being adulterous in their worship. But the seal of this man took the musical, the man whose name means music, and the woman that means to lie, and pierced them together and say, no, that's not going to happen. I want to propose to you that a lot of songs we sing today are lying and deceiving us. Watch the words. We need to understand the gospel, and anything that goes against the nature of God or focuses too much on us, we are going to have to address that. if we are going to call that worship, if it's a song that you're singing in a stage, go ahead. That's just a concert. But I'm talking about, don't call that worship. Don't call that honoring and respecting the presence of God. In heaven, they say, holy, holy, holy. He is holy. So we need to come to the conclusion that how we worship God, how we praise, what comes out of our mouth, the songs, the melodies that come out of our mouth, are they honoring to God? Is it something that's pleasing to the Lord, or is something we just came up because people like it? Are these words deceitful? Are they telling lies that go against the true gospel? And I'm not going to mention any song specifically so that I don't get personal, but there is quite a bit there that should be eliminated from what we call worship. Now remember, we are now attempting, and this is the purpose of this podcast, to minister unto the Lord, to honor and respect the Lord. Phineas, if he were to be right now in some of our services, he will probably take a lance and spears a few. Now, where is the word Phineas? His name means mouth of grass or an oracle. I believe that brass is significance of somebody who's bold and executing a judgment. Brass has always represented judgment. And I believe that the Lord is going to use some of us to judge on his behalf. I'm not judging the people. The Lord is judging. He has will make people an oracle unto the Lord. Remember, we came from Balaam, a diviner, saying things. Actually, his donkey spoke in the previous chapters. The Lord is going to take people that are oracles that are going to speak truth of the things that are wrong in some of our worship activities. If they don't honor God, we should not call it worship. We should not gather and say that is worship. We should not gather to entertain each other and call that worship. That's not what it is. The sacrifice occurred in outer courts in the Old Testament. In the inner courts, in the Holy of Holies, only the presence of God and the high priest. And that hasn't changed. We are high priest. Jesus is our high priest. And we are a royal priesthood, I should say. But he is our high priest. We are to understand the presence of God and how to honor God. In the Old Testament, the priest could die because he wasn't clean or right. God's still holy. And we need to know that because we need to access people, we don't dumb it down to make it accessible. God doesn't need a reputation. He's already holy. And I think we need more Phineas. We need zeal and jealousy for our God. So one of the things that happens in this chapter is that the Lord, I think I mentioned it when I read the chapter, he made a covenant of peace. And why is that important? Remember that I said that the tabernacle, restoration of the tabernacle of David to me started prophesying an order of Melchizedek, a king and a priest of the order of Melchizedek, Psalm 110. Melchizedek came into the picture in Genesis 14, and we will do more in detail with scriptures about this. When Abraham met him and saw him as an ancient priest that has always existed, that has no father and no mother, and that we will go into a lot of details, but I needed to mention that Melchizedek was called the king of Salem. Salem is the same word as shalom in the Hebrew. He's a king of peace, just like Jesus is our king of peace. So he is our high priest of the order of Melchizedek. Also, he was the king of righteousness. Melchizedek was the king of righteousness. That's what his name means. Melech is king, Sedek, righteousness. Melech, Sedek. Melech, Sedek, king of righteousness. So there is a connection between peace and righteousness. So if we are going to be like I described in my previous episode and talk about holiness, we need to understand justice and righteousness. There was a judgment here for a man who stood for righteousness, for things that were right. And that was granted a covenant of peace. So when we stand for righteousness, we understand the order of Melchizedek. And that usually brings peace, king of Salem, King of Shalom. So that covenant of peace is really Melchizedek himself coming to the place to establish that order. So how did that happen? Well, it happened through a man who had a zeal for the things of God, for the righteous things of God. So what we have here is God promises peace, and a lot of people in the church don't have any peace. So I have to question: are they? Who are they worshiping? Because when we have the Lord, we find ourselves centered in His peace. I'm not saying things are easy, but we find peace even in the midst of tragedy. So the covenant is a relationship that we have with God that brings peace. And that peace is not absence of conflict. I already said it's not, doesn't mean you don't have issues, but you find a resting sensation in you that you know, I am okay, I am at peace. In Isaiah 54:10, it says, though the mountains be shaken and the hills be removed, yet my unfailing love for you will not be shaken, nor my covenant of peace be removed, says the Lord, who has compassion on you. So the Lord made a covenant of peace with Phinehas for all his generations. And so has the Lord, because he is the King of peace. So we want to maintain that covenant of peace. So we need to understand the zeal of all those adulterous things that we bring into our services. They should not be tolerated. We need to identify what is it that God wants. And when we minister unto the Lord, don't let him have to compete for attention. It's not the way of the Lord. If we're going to minister to people, then that has a different purpose. But we should have been with him and have that relationship, that covenant with him for, intentional. That's why for me, spending time corporately, because I can spend time in the presence of God by myself, but I am speaking of establishing these locations where the Lord will choose to rest, because he is the most important thing in that place. The other scripture I wanted to read is Isaiah 32:17. The fruit of righteousness, remember Melchizedek is the king of righteousness, will be peace. This is Isaiah 32:17. So the fruit of righteousness is peace. Why? Because Phinehas chose righteousness. He chose to be righteous and to put that thing that was lying through worship. And his mouth of brass brought judgment and brought righteousness. The effect of righteousness, continues the verse 17, will be quietness and confidence forever. And that's what we need, a confidence to come to the throne of grace boldly. So the Prince of Peace is Jesus. We don't have to say that. And remember, the King of Peace is Melchizedek. He was of the order of Melchizedek, says in Psalm 110. The other thing is peace is mentioned, is even a fruit of the Spirit. So in Colossians 1:19-20 says, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him. I'm speaking of the Lord, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood and shed on the cross. Now, the reason why I'm reading this verse is if you read Genesis 14, you're going to see Abraham, they're doing communion. He breaks bread with Melchizedek, and there is the wine and the bread and the tithe. So Abraham, before the law even came into place, he is treating Melchizedek as a priest. It's a priesthood that has existed forever. And so he already had that revelation, Abraham, and he knew, oh my goodness, I should make an investment here. This is a priest. And it's important that we understand that this peace through his blood, as it says in Colossians 1:19-20, that's what Jesus did with his blood. He was our high priest who intercedes for us. He is the one who made the sacrifice in order for us to be saved. So that's important for us to recognize that that communion that we have, that when we take communion, we are making a covenant, is reminding people of that covenant that we already have of blood that brings peace, because it's the King of Peace himself. And last but not least, peace, of course, is a gift of the Spirit in Galatians 5:22-23. So a covenant of peace brings so many things. But why did the Lord make the covenant of peace? The Lord made the covenant of peace because a righteous man stood for righteousness. And he fought for that idolatry, for that melodious, that music that brought lies and deceitfulness. Why the scripture is in there? The Lord's going to kill them all. There was a plague to kill them all. And we had a plague not too long ago. But what is the Lord doing? The Lord is dealing with a structure that may not be honoring him, but is honoring people or buildings or other things. And I think it's time for us to revisit how we honor God. And doesn't mean we don't minister to people. Don't send me hate mail. We will continue minister. We make disciples of all people. We will minister to people. We will show how amazing Jesus Christ is. But when we're worshiping the Lord, when we're focusing on the presence, we are focusing on him only. And there shouldn't be any competition. No teaching. It's just him. And he's everything. He's our portion. He's our reward. So I hope that this made sense. It's just one chapter. I encourage you to reread Numbers 25. It focuses on the actions of a righteous man that brings a covenant of peace, that speaks of the jealousy of God, that when we honor him, and then nothing should compete with what we do for him. So I hope that in this quick reading of chapter number 25, you can learn some things. And for those that are watching and are musicians, remember, as you worship the Lord, why are you doing it? Who are you doing it for? Be zealous. Have a zeal to honor your God and to respect your God. He is a jealous God, and that has not changed. And he demands our full attention. So I hope that we engage in a more understanding his holiness, so that our worship and our honoring of him is all holy and done properly. So this I wanted to address, because I think as we talk about minister unto the Lord, we need to understand that he's still jealous, and that whatever words we sing, whatever music we play, the source of those things, how we administer. We're not playing 3 songs so that people can sing. We are singing songs because they are an offering unto the Lord. It's a sacrifice of praise. That is the tabernacle of David. So I hope that makes sense. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. Read your Bible. Numbers 25 is a great chapter. And let's be zealous for the Lord. All he needs is one man to take righteous action, and he will spare the people. So I will see you next week, and hopefully we can talk more on this subject that I am so fascinated by, which is worship and hosting the presence of God. So until next time, thank you to Inside Now one more time, and thank you for liking, subscribing, and sharing the episode. And we will continue discipling and equipping people to host the presence of God.